I'm hoping the Big Ten has to modify their system for us.
Probably like getting grade 10 sandpaper rubbed on your face every day.
I mean, we say it all the time, whether, there's two types of turds, you're a sinker or you're a floater, but you're still a turd, right? I
mean, we are about players and players playing the plays and not necessarily the plays.
Welcome to the Varsity Club podcast. My name is Derek Peterson. It is early on a Thursday morning, early for me on a Thursday morning. I have three of your favorite Hail Varsity writers joining me today. It's Nebraska's bye week. So we're going to be talking about just the season to this point, kind of assessing where Nebraska's at, where Nebraska has still to go. We're going to get into that conversation and probably talk for quite a bit. Greg Smith is joining me. Greg, hello. How are you?
I am well. I am very upset still, as I told Steve earlier this week, that it is hoodie season. As you have on a hoodie, Jacob's got a quarter zip on. Steve probably has a closet full of quarter zip behind him. I am not thrilled about this.
What's wrong with hoodie season?
Sucks, man. Like, bring back the sun. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail this thing to start the whole thing, to start it off as you just said hello. But
did you just say that hoodie season sucks?
I'm bitter about this, man. Like, I've been on a rampage for like the last 2 weeks.
I feel like we've had this conversation many times.
We had it 2 weeks ago.
And I always forget that this is your stance. Yeah. And then you remind me of it, and I just lose a little bit of respect for you each time. But apparently that doesn't last, because I forget about it and you jump right back up. Steve, hello. How are you?
Hello, Derek. I am doing great. As with you, I am always shocked when I hear Greg's stance on fall weather. It's disappointing. It's just everything you can think about. I mean, it's about 40, 45 degrees right now, and it's awesome. I want to go on a walk. So I'm very excited that the cold weather has arrived.
I am right there with you. It is it's cold and cloudy and wet here in Arlington Heights. It's 50 degrees. And it's getting to the point here where it's like super cold in the mornings. And so you dress accordingly. And then in the afternoon, it's like, ooh, I need to take the hoodie off. And then when you take the dog out for like the last walk of the evening before you go to bed, it's like, if you walk outside in shorts, you're just going to hate your life. Yeah. We've reached that point. And last but not least, I haven't had him on this podcast in a very long time. I'm very excited to have him back. Jacob Padilla. Jacob, hello. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. I'm excited to actually be here. Like you said, it's been a long time.
It has been a while. Because it has been a while, we're not going to talk about the Suns, but I am going to give you a chance to strut your stuff on what happened with Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers at Soldier Field. Specifically because we have Greg on this podcast. Is there anything that you would like to say regarding the Packers-Bears rivalry, regarding Aaron Rodgers' subsequent ownership of a certain NFL franchise? Anything that you would like to add?
I honestly don't think anything needs to be said. I think Aaron said it all. I think Bears fans know it. They know the situation. Greg knows it.
I'm very happy for you in the sense that's like a very legitimate thing that you can say. Like, no, nothing else has to be said. He said, I own you. Every single person in that stadium knew it. I'm happy for you that that's the case.
That's what makes it so much worse. It really does. Like, there's really nothing to even like combat that with. So I will just hope we move on quickly.
Before we started, well, no, we're not going to move on quickly. Before we started podcasting, Greg, you said if he played for any other franchise, I would be fine. Any other franchise.
Yeah, definitely. Like the way that Aaron Rodgers operates it really appeals to me. Except for like every time I think it's the off season and I'm like, yeah, he did something funny. I got to remember that, oh yeah, he's going to come beat the Bears twice during the season. So I can't like this guy too much. So yeah, it's a rough spot to be in.
Hey, he has done something wrong in that he needs to get a haircut. The hair looks weird coming out of the back of his helmet, especially because he has a helmet that's like 50 years too old.
That is true. There you go.
Yeah, I agree with that, but that's kind of how I feel about LeBron, Greg. So
it evens out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate situation for him to be there, but oh well. At least I haven't had to watch it for his entire career like you have, so yeah, I feel much better about that.
This Lakers team this season is probably going to be extra painful for Jacob to watch, because not only does it have LeBron on it, he's going to have to sit and watch Russell Westbrook try to coexist with dudes and apparently play with Rajon Rondo at the same time.
Yeah. That actually makes it better, Derek.
That makes it better?
Yeah. I honestly, the fact that Steph Curry had a 21, 10, and 10 triple double on 21 shots was just magical in that game. This is the ultimate troll job. Welcome to the Lakers, Russ. I'm going to go out and do what you do.
Yeah, if we're one game into the season, I'm already upset with Frank Vogel. Like, I can't, like, how much longer is that going to be a thing? Like, you can't play those two together. You also can't play Russ with two bigs. Like, it just doesn't, like, it feel like I'm going to be having like this internal struggle for half the season at least, while Frank Vogel figures out what he actually needs to do, while the rest of us already know it.
Hey, what did I tell you? It was either last week or the week before on your podcast. What did I tell you? I said, just be patient. The first couple of weeks are going to look terrible. Because when would you rather have him learn that he can't play Rondo and Westbrook together? The first game of the season or the 83rd game of the season?
This is true. And you did warn me. Anthony Davis tried to warn everybody. Like, I get it, but it's different when you end up seeing it and you just get frustrated anyway.
So the question is, does he believe it can work? Or does he really not have any choice because of the players on the team? Like, he kind of has no choice at this point not to play Davis at the 4 and play the two bigs because they just aren't going to do that all season long and put that wear and tear on Davis, and he doesn't want to do it. And obviously, you're not to the point where you're going to stagger Russ with the starters because the starters are going to be playing so much. So I feel kind of like he's trapped a little bit with that. And then I think some of the Rondo stuff where they didn't, some of the guys that were hurt and they don't have any, they felt like maybe he could kind of guard Steph. So that, I think that might've been part of it because you definitely don't want Russ doing that. So I think part of it is just the roster itself and kind of the player preferences and the way you kind of have to do things. At least I would hope so. I don't think it was, all right, you know what? This is going to be a great lineup. I'm going to try this. This is the only way we're going to be able to win here.
I will choose to hope that you are correct in that. And that the injury thing is a part of it too. Like, they do need to get the full rotation back because all those guys are wings that are hurt. But like, I don't know. Like, this is just my entire frustration with Vogel is that eventually I feel like he will adjust because he did it 2 years ago. Like, this is kind of his MO. But we'll see. Like, I would just like it to be faster.
Hey, just think about it this way. I was so excited for the Thunder to open their season on Wednesday night in Utah against the Jazz. And I was excited for a quarter and they got down by 20. And I was like, all right, time to go watch a different game. This is my lot in life this season. So
did you get to see the Isaiah Roby dunk at least?
I did. Okay. Yeah.
Well,
I got to see Roby. I got to see Darius Baisley. I got to see Josh Giddey do some cool stuff. I'm giddy for Giddey. And we'll get rolling. Jacob, you said something. Does he have blind confidence or faith or trust that it's going to work, or is he just trapped? And I got to say, what an absolutely beautiful segue into what we're going to talk about today on this podcast as it relates to Nebraska. You should have a podcast. You should have a podcast, which you do.
I do.
Plug it.
The Nebraska Preps post game with Damon Benning and myself. Recapping basically high school sports. We're heading into the high school football postseason here in Nebraska, kind of the stretch run. So check that out. And we may or may not have something else in the works for basketball season. Just stay tuned on that.
Greg, you also have a podcast. Why don't you plug yours now too?
I do. And before I plug mine, I will say, make sure you guys are listening to Jacobs as we head into the playoffs. It's really good. I'm excited personally for the Class B playoffs. Very random unless you live in Nebraska, but it's going to be very good. I host a straight up breakdown podcast where I get to spread my wings a little bit and not talk all the time about Huskers, which is what we'll talk about today, which is fine. There's a lot to talk about, but I also try to mix in some NBA, some NFL, a lot of other things, give you the real breakdown of everything that's happening. And I get to put people on blast and call them haters every week, which is both my favorite times in the show.
Elsewhere in the it's not the cinematic, it would be the audio centric. Elsewhere in the Hail Varsity Network universe, Brandon Vogel has his own podcast, the ID Preview Show podcast. Go subscribe to that. Aaron Sorensen and Sasha Durkin also have the Mind Your Own podcast. Go subscribe to that. Give all of these shows a 5-star review and rating. That stuff helps. Also, email Brandon and Aaron to try to get Steve his own podcast because he does not have one. But Steve does have premium stuff that goes up every single week that you need to be reading. And in order to do that, you got to subscribe to hailvarsity.com. So hailvarsity.com/subscribe, and you can read all of Steve's excellent stuff. He had one story this week about Nebraska's red zone inefficiency that we're going to talk about later on in the podcast. So make sure you get all that stuff taken care of. There's a new magazine coming as well. Also, shouts to Cam for producing this podcast every week. I hope he's smiling because I told him I wasn't going to do that anymore because of a certain hoodie that shall not be named. Guys, let's transition to Nebraska. So here's how I want to set this conversation off. Nebraska's at its bye week. It's 3-5 on the year. Disappointment, whatever you want to call it. Here's how I want to start. I just want to get kind of your guys's summarized thoughts on the first 8 games to this point in the season. So view me as somebody who watched 2018, 2019, 2020 Nebraska football games. I know the context around how important this season was, but I've been out of the country until today. I got back today. I had fun. Now I'm back. Now I have to learn all about this Nebraska football team. So maybe the fun times are going away. I would like each of you to summarize for me, however succinctly you want to put it, the first 8 games of Nebraska football from your perspective this season. Steve, I'm going to start with you.
Well, Derek, they can't decide on a running back rotation. They kind of have lately with Ramir Johnson. They can't play the best receivers on the roster. They don't really have an offensive identity aside from the quarterback, Taylor Martinez, scrambling when he can. And outside of that. Oh
my God, Freudian slip.
Oh no.
Yes.
No.
Love it. Taylor, love it.
You've been watching the broadcast too much.
I'm sorry. Continue.
And outside of that, they can't win close games. So that is your little snapshot of Nebraska 2021.
Sounds very dire.
It doesn't sound good, honestly. There's not a lot of positive momentum going on, I would think.
I mean, that makes sense for a team that sits at 3-5. Greg, can you inject any optimism or sunlight into this situation, or is it still going to be as cloudy and dreary as my outside looks right now?
It's still going to stay dreary because my kind of first snap judgment of how to explain this is that every time you thought that this team has had momentum so far this season, they have found ways to let that slip through their fingers, whether it be in individual games or week to week, and with an inability to like string like quarters together, much less games together. I would tell you, if you haven't been watching, that the defense has mostly held up their end of the bargain, but they get no help from the offense, and there are still a number of bizarre like personnel decisions that happen on a week to week and a game to game and drive to drive basis.
Jacob, summarize this first 8 games for me.
Well, fortunately for you who have been out of town, I'm assuming you watched last season and the season before, so it's the same old movie. They brought in some more well-known actors. They've tried a few different things, but it's still the same director, still the same predictable story twists. We're still ending up at the same place at the end of the movie, it seems like. So you really haven't missed a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. It's kind of been the same old thing.
If I was Tony Reale, I'd give you points for keeping the metaphor going. Congratulations. Well done.
Also, I'm glad you gave me, you went, let me go last because it gave me time to kind of flesh that out.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So I'm just going to go through, this is going to be a wide ranging conversation. That's going to flow. I don't really have a set structure I want to go, but Steve, you said something and Greg sort of piggybacked off of it. Can't get the best wide receivers on the field. What do you mean? Why do you say that?
Because Xavier Betts doesn't play consistent minutes. I think everybody who watches Nebraska football can look at a guy like Xavier Betts and want him on the field just because of how electric he can be with the ball in his hands. But for whatever reason, whether he runs the wrong routes, doesn't block well enough, doesn't perform well enough Monday through Friday, whatever it is, he can't find a way to stay on the field, and the coaches don't seem comfortable putting him out there for whatever reason. I think if that's kind of an example of not putting the best receivers out there. Alante Brown, where's he gone? I don't know. It just seems like another guy that could do things with the ball in his hands, but he just doesn't get out there. So that's what I kind of mean by the receiver rotation and who they're putting out there.
So Greg, I can tell you want to say something, but let me say this first. So this is not a new situation with this regime. This is not a new sort of phenomenon. They have had this problem specifically at wide receiver for his entire tenure here. And it's made more befuddling by the fact that he coached wide receivers before he got that kind of next big job. When he was at Oregon, he was their wide receiver coach before he was the OC. So this whole situation is very, very fascinating, because you go back to JD Spielman was upset with whatever was going on and left, and he wasn't being used the right way. Their first year here, they added a bunch of receivers that were the exact same type, skill set, body type, and half of them felt that they weren't being used the right way. Then you get to Wando Robinson. He feels he's not being used the right way, and he leaves. Darian Chase was here for a year. That one kind of gets lost to the shuffle just because they had so many guys that have left. They have Jamie Nance and Demarion Houston that never see the field. Jamie Nance was a return guy who maybe should have gotten a chance in the return game. Then you get to Alante Brown, Xavier Betts. Those guys can't get on the field. They can't stay on the field. There is a recurring pattern, specifically at wide receiver, where the guys that they invest a lot of time and energy and effort in recruiting don't see the field. And then you've got, and it sounds like I'm picking on them because there's the same few guys that I mentioned each time. I don't want it to come off as if I'm picking on them, but to an extent, because of the way that they've managed the room, I would say the coaching staff has put sort of this fan-based target on their backs, and that's Levi Falk, Wyatt Lever, Brody Belt, that sort of cast of characters, the walk-on guys that do really well in practice or that are local guys that quote unquote understand what it means at Nebraska. Those guys are on the field and not necessarily producing it at the level that would keep them on the field. Meanwhile, Xavier Betts, Alante Brown, Betts comes in and has a big play, and then he disappears. So I'm not really sure what to. I don't know what's happening with this wide receiver room. Greg, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
I think that part of the problem here, and as it relates to those, that kind of cast of characters, as you turned with that do get to play and that do, like, fairly or not, have a target on their back from a lot of the fan base, is that if in playing those guys instead of Betts and Brown, and in some cases Manning too, because he wasn't out there at the end of that Michigan game, so that got brought up as well. I think to sum it all up, it feels like Nebraska doesn't always give itself the best chance to stress a defense based on who they're playing. Because when the first group of those guys, the Lever, Falk, Belt group comes in, like, it just feels like a defense has no concern whatsoever that those guys are going to go by them. And you at least have to have a threat out there. And then what does that then lead itself into is that teams just continuously pack the box against Nebraska because they can, and they're not threatened by what's happening on the outside. And then it just continues to compound upon itself. And that, I think, is why you end up getting so much like interest and kind of passion from the fan base about what's happening with wide receiver, because everyone can see mostly that is not seeming to work to help the offense at all.
So here's the counter argument to this. Samori Toure leads the team in receptions. If you just look at wide receivers, Samori Toure is number 1, Omar Manning is number 2, Xavier Betts is number 3 in receptions. So, like, those are the guys that you would want, right? So the counter to, well, Frost isn't putting, their best receivers on the field for the entire game is, well, sometimes they snap it 80 times a game. They're running a lot of plays. They're going at a quick tempo. You need to have a rotation so guys aren't tired out by the end of the game. Jacob, is that what's going on? Or is there something where you feel like there's a little bit of a mismanagement of the wide receiver rotation?
No, I definitely don't buy the rotation because you look at it again this past week. Levi Falk, 44 snaps. The third most is Omar Manning with 21. Samori Toure led the team with 54. So that's not we're spreading everybody out. We're giving everybody equal reps. We're just trying to keep everybody fresh. They just decided Levi Falk was the best option. And to be fair, he actually has been more productive than I think a lot of us expected. He's, especially over the last few games, last 3 or 4 games, he's really stepped up and actually has helped out the team. But he's still like 5th on the team in receiving. And obviously Betts and Manning are ahead of him. And those are guys that it goes back to, at this point in his tenure, how is it that there's still a disconnect between your most talented players and being able to play for you? And that goes back to, obviously there's some on the individual players here if they're not kind of living up to their side of the bargain, but these are the players that this coaching staff targeted and recruited and put at the top of their board and put so much effort into getting to Lincoln, like you said. So at this point, if they still can't satisfy you enough to get on the field and play starters reps, then that's either a bust in recruiting or a bust in player management and ability to connect with these guys and help get them ready. It feels almost like, well, we're just kind of giving up. We're just going with this guy that we feel has done everything. Obviously, you've got to reward the guys that do what they're supposed to a certain degree for sake of culture and kind of holding everybody accountable. But at the same time, you've got to be able to give yourself the best chance to win and get those best players out there and get them ready and coach them up. And if that's not happening, that ultimately falls on you as a coaching staff. And I don't, like he said, you don't want to target these guys, but just a guy like Wyatt Lever, who he kind of went away and then came back again this week. And he had that one catch in the 2-minute drill. But why is Falk and Lever the guys out there in your 2-minute drill? If those are the only guys that understand what plays you're going to run in the 2-minute drill, then I'm sorry, that's on you as a coach. And we're seeing now that, like even with Samori Toure, teams are blanketing him. He is not getting open. You've got to get more guys out there that can win consistently, and whether that's to take pressure off of Toure and maybe give him better opportunities, or step up and become the number one option, because Toure is not doing that right now. And that just hasn't been the case. And it's unfortunate. It's frustrating to watch, because you do go out and see guys make big plays, and it just makes you wonder, why can't we do this more often?
Anybody else have any other thoughts on the wide receivers before we move on? So it's interesting that we start here, because it's certainly Nebraska's not 3-5 simply because they can't figure out how to put their best skill talent on the field on offense. That's certainly I don't want to say a symptom, but that's definitely an issue that they're running into, and something that is playing a part in overall offensive inefficiency. But Nebraska's not 3-5 because of that. Nebraska's 3-5 because, like Jacob said in his summation of the season, it's the same movie over and over and over again. So this is really the big thing that I think, the big question that everybody is thinking about and trying to figure out, well, can you answer this in a bye week? The same movie, the same problems, the same mistakes, just manifesting themselves in different ways in different phases of the game sometimes. Who does that fall on? Who bears the most responsibility for Nebraska? They've got 5 losses this season. All of them have been in games decided by 8 points or less. Over the course of Frost's tenure, he's 5-17 in those quote unquote close games, 1-possession games. He's 5-17 now, I believe is the record. So this conversation we had in our big Slack group earlier this week, and it was perfect, because it was kind of where I wanted to go with this podcast. Let's just talk overall. Who bears the most responsibility for where Nebraska is at this season right now? Is it on Scott Frost and the coaching staff for Jacob, like you said, not getting guys ready to go, not getting guys ready to play, or getting guys on the field when they need them on the field, making sure that guys are able to perform in those clutch moments? Or is it simply Adrian Martinez fumbled the ball in their 3-minute drive with like a second before the referee blew the whistle dead, and Jacques Yant slipped? Otherwise, he would have scored a touchdown against Michigan. Like, is it players not playing to the best of their ability, or is it coaching? I mean, which it's obviously a little bit of both because it's a football team, but which bears more responsibility? Steve?
Yeah, I was going to go. That's put it on both Frost and the players, because I completely agree with you. If Adrian doesn't, if a whistle is blown a half a second before Adrian Martinez is stripped in Michigan, who knows how that game ends? If Yant does something that he would do 99 out of 100 times and doesn't slip on the field and then gets in the end zone, who knows how that game turns out? So the team
if
is
the
close.
punt goes right instead of left.
Yeah. This team is close, and I know I sound like a coach right now, and that's bad, but at the end of the day, this is Scott Frost's program. This is his players. These are his play calls. This is his game management. This is his roster management. It needs to fall more on Scott Frost, if you ask me.
Anybody else want to jump in? Where are you guys at on this?
I thought you were going to call on somebody.
Yeah.
I'll go.
No, free flowing conversation, guys. Come on, free flowing conversation.
Okay, so okay.
I'm just not going to say anything the rest of the podcast. It's on you guys to carry it the rest of the way.
That's fine. Put it on our backs. If this was year one and of the Scott Frost experience, and Adrian Martinez fumbled that ball, and Jacques Yant tripped on the goal line, and the punt went sideways, and this ill-timed penalty happened in the Illinois game that caused a huge slide, I'd say, okay, we got to have the players like hold up their end of the bargain. But when those things have now happened for 4 consecutive years, and as we say all the time, like there are always different things each week that happen to this football program, at some point that then just becomes about the culture or the type of program that the coach has built. Like the coach, to me, Scott Frost, has not built a program that cares about the details. And that's why they have so many issues with these details on a week-to-week basis, like all the time, consistently.
So question for you. Because I get that part of it, but a lot of times when we have a conversation about detail mistakes or not caring about the little things enough, that conversation is specifically confined to the offense with a little bit of special teams. We don't really talk about the defense. So is it about culture, or is it about just, and this is the hardest part of it, are they just unlucky? Because I don't know if you can say culture, because if there was a problem overall with the culture of the football team, then it would be impacting the defense as well. Now, maybe this is a unique situation because Frost is so hands-off with the defense and it's mostly Eric Chenander's reign. But I just think if there was a problem with the culture, the defense wouldn't be where the defense is at. And we don't really have a lot of problems with the defense, save for the Illinois game to start the season.
Man, I don't want to pile on Frost here, but like it, and I say this, it does feel like the reason you don't have that with the defense is because he's extremely hands-off. Like, I mean, we have quotes with him saying that he doesn't pay attention to the defense in game, or, you know, leading up to a game week, he's only watching the opposing team's defense. He hasn't really looked at their offense at all and leaves that all to Chenander. So I would say this, if you were ever going to have a situation on a football team where there would be a split in that kind of culture area, it would be on this type of team where the head coach is so hands-off with the defense, and it doesn't say anything good that the offense, that was the reason that he was hired, is where you have all of the blunder.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that. No, actually, I agree with all of it, but also it's not just that. Yeah, the players are making mistakes in bad moments, but it's all the other mistakes that are more kind of team driven and culture driven and practice driven that kind of add up. So Yant fumbled in that situation. That's bad luck. They had a few more times to score in that game afterward and couldn't take advantage of then either. So that made that one all the more important because it was their best, kind of their best opportunity, their most direct, like, hey, we're going to score here if we simply execute. And
yeah, that was in the third quarter.
Yeah.
It's not like that was like the last drive of the fourth. That was the third quarter.
Yeah. So, the players are making individual mistakes, but it's the overall problems with the program that keeps putting Nebraska in these one-score games to where those kind of mistakes are more memorable and more important and kill the team. So it's you can live with a quarterback fumbling the ball. You can live with a guy slipping on a certain play. But when you're also messing up a lot of plays and failing to establish the way that you want to play and control the game, those become all the more important. And that still falls back on kind of the team as a whole and how you prepared to get here and what you are as a team.
So I think the direction that this podcast is trending, I'm going to be the Scott Frost defender here. And I think I'm going to do that just to have the opposing viewpoint. It's not necessarily, well, I wrote the column. I was like, after the Michigan game, I was like, I think that Scott Frost is the guy. And so you look at some of the stuff that you saw in the Michigan game, which was carryover. I mean, they played 3 top 10 teams in 4 weeks, and they were in the game with each of those teams. And against Michigan, and I wrote this at the time, it didn't feel like they were in it because Michigan was screwing up. It felt like they were in it because Michigan was a good team and Nebraska was playing well and gave themselves a chance at the end to win. So I see Scott Frost's system working. I see it's taken him time. The Big Ten didn't adjust to him. He adjusted to the Big Ten, whatever. That's a piece of it, but he adjusted, and I see his stuff working now. And, Adrian Martinez is 8th nationally in passing yards. He's among the best in QBR and expected points added with ESPN's metric. They have a defense that's playing really, really well. And this is going to be probably an oversimplification, but it's maybe just the clearest way that I can think to describe this team. I think they just have a good team with a 4-win offensive line. Like, I think they just have a really subpar offensive line. And if they had an even average offensive line, maybe an above average offensive line, they're a bowl team already. And, I think some of the stuff that has happened is just sheer dumb luck, being unlucky, which sucks. But I think part of it is just they don't have a very good offensive line. And when we were coming into the season, I know I wasn't alone in saying this, but I said the offensive line is going to be the most important thing for Nebraska football in 2021. If they have a good offensive line, it's going to carry the offense, but that offensive line is going to take Nebraska as far as it will take it. And so far, that offensive line is, I said 4, it's a 3-win offensive line right now. And I think they have a better quarterback than that. I think they have a better defense than that. Now, I don't think they have, we've said this, I said this on our Slack channel, Adrian makes critical mistakes at bad times. And he's done that throughout the course of his career to the point where you just have to say, that's kind of just who he is at this point. The turnovers are down. The penalties are down. They're doing things better. Culture sounds better. The stuff offensively looks like it's working. They just have a bad offensive line. And maybe that's all there is to it. And so do you put that on Scott Frost? Do you put that on Greg Austin? Or you put that on the offensive line? Probably a combination of all 3 of them. Do you guys agree with that assessment? Anyone can jump in.
I completely agree with that because like if you follow football your whole life, you know that good offenses always start with an offensive line, right? If you can protect a quarterback and he's not second guessing himself and looking over his shoulder every time he drops back, he's going to be more comfortable. If you have a good offensive line, you can have a good run game. And just like Scott Frost says all the time, if you can hit some run plays and make the defense understand that you can run the ball, that opens up the pass with play action and just all the window dressing in the backfield that he loves to do. I think that's a great point, Derek. I mean, but at the end of the day, I think you need to look at just the O-line recruitment there and just the way that they're teaching the O-line. And I guess, doesn't it just seem like there's a disconnect with like pretty much everything with the offense? Like, it's not the same way on defense. Eric Shenander has that unit just humming right now. It's really, really good. And I really respected what they've done. But on the offensive side, there's just like a disconnect, and it all starts, like you said, with the offensive line, right? Just the way that they're teaching, something is wrong, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So far, it seems like, and I like him, so this is going to sound harsh, but it seems like Bryce Benhart is an evaluation miss. So far to this point. Now he can get better, players can develop, but so far to this point, it seems like Bryce Benhart is an evaluation miss. And Greg and I, you and I have talked about this a ton. When they have been building out their offensive line, they have built it out in a manner where they viewed Benhart and Corcoran on the right and the left side, respectively, as their sort of pillars of a really good offensive line. And they viewed those guys because of, those guys were highly recruited, highly rated as prospects. They viewed those guys as building blocks for them in the offensive line. One of them has not been what they expected. And so they've had to do some adjusting. The other problem that they've had is they haven't been able to find a left guard until they found Nori Newilly. Cam has been better snapping the ball, but they've just had to play shuffle at tackle. They finally find somebody in Teddy Prohashka, and then he tears his ACL. So, when you're not comfortable with your tackles in the Big Ten, when you're having to play these types of edge rushers week in and week out, it's going to cause problems. So, part of it is you can simplify it down to, well, it was an evaluation miss so far on Bryce Benhart, a guy they viewed was going to be a really, really important piece for them. And they've had to adjust for that. And that's on the coaching staff. That's a problem, but it's also a problem that it's not easy to fix in season. Greg, Jacob, how do you guys feel about the offensive line?
Yeah. And I know you single out Bryce Benhart, but Corcoran has been as bad or worse on any.
No, yeah, absolutely.
And so
absolutely.
That's the problem and Benhart wasn't great last year, but I don't think he was as bad as he was this year. Same thing with Ethan Piper, which is the real problem. Yeah, exactly. He wasn't great last year. I know he got benched a couple of times and went back in there, but he wasn't unplayable like he has been this year. So that goes back to kind of the overall kind of development on the team, in addition to the evaluation of it. And this goes back to the problem with the program and at other positions as well. How many times they haven't had a problem recruiting. It's just the guys they brought in haven't panned out. And to the degree that it's happened, I don't think you can say it's all recruiting misses. It's what happens once these guys get here. And we're seeing that play out again with the offensive line. We've seen it time and time again with the skill positions. And some guys defensively, not to the same degree, but it's a consistent problem. And that goes back to the guys in charge. And yes, this falls on Greg Austin, but it also falls on Scott Frost. I know he's been hands-on somewhat with the offensive line with some of the personnel decisions. He's kind of been the one making those calls. And so it just kind of goes back to the way they're developing. It goes back to the practice as a whole. It goes back to the way you run your program. And Frost is ultimately in charge of that. And it's a Monday through Friday thing. And we're just not seeing whatever they're trying to do work out for whatever reason.
And specifically, sorry, Steve, I will get to you. And before I forget, the Benhart and Corcoran situation to me specifically is puzzling because I don't know how you go from Bryce Benhart being a big athletic tackle who wrestled in high school, was a great, like I didn't just say that he wrestled like, oh, he just did it, but he was really, really good as a wrestler in high school in Minnesota. So he was obviously athletic. He had a mean streak to him. He gets here, and after a couple of years, looks like a totally different prospect and player. Like the regression there is very noticeable, right? Like, how do you get to that point? How do you get to, Turner Corcoran, a kid that could have gone anywhere in the country that he wanted to go? He's like kind of known for being an athletic tackle. Maybe he could have played guard. We'll see what happens down the line. But still, he was an athletic tackle, sweet feet, and then now he's getting beat around the edge. Now, part of that is, and Steve and I have talked about this, Nebraska basically, and this is what it happens in the Big Ten, every week you're playing against someone's elite edge rusher. It's just varying degrees of elite, right? Like, now I just lost his name, the guy from last week at Minnesota. Like, I guess
Mafe.
There we go. Thank you. Like he's closer, I guess, to the middle of that pack of those guys. And if he's in the middle of the pack, you know how good the edge rushers are in this league. And so to Derek's earlier point, like I think it's Derek, you're not going to be able to get by with tackle play like this. And that's not even to say the guard play has been perfect, because it hasn't been. But also within that, it goes to what Jacob was saying about the personnel decisions, because why are you at the point where Newelly plays now, and he's been fine, but he was like 4th or 5th in the depth chart coming into the season, and it's not like he was a new player. He had been there. So there is still this disconnect at multiple positions, but also there is a development issue. Like there's been some clear regression from players, which is really like it's alarming. It's not good, because then you end up in a situation, as I wrote for Varsity.com, where if you start to look at the transfer portal, and Scott Frost said, hey, we're going to go out and we need to get a couple of pieces and we need to find impact players. Well, where exactly do they need to go? Because I could make a case that every single position on the offense needs at least one guy. That offensive line probably needs 2 different players, one at tackle and one at guard. And that's assuming that, say, you don't get like a wild card of putting this into the universe, but a wild card like Cam Jurgens decides to leave, right? Because then what happens? Like, you just never know. And so they need a lot of help in various areas. And I don't know if their development has been strong enough across the board offensively to really help that.
Well, and the scary part is the staff has locked in on positions of need and gone out and addressed that. They put a lot of resources into recruiting that offensive line and building it up. And this is the offensive line that's like, all right, this is where we need to get to. Wide receiver, they went out and they got after the kind of failures with all the little slot guys, they went out and got the bigger, more athletic receivers. All right, these are the guys we need. And now they're not playing them. So it hasn't been a problem with identifying, all right, what we need on this roster. They've gone out and done that pretty well. It just isn't translating to the games. So that kind of I think would have you a little worried about their ability to address the problems, because it's not like they haven't gone down that route and tried to, all right, so we need this. We went out and got it, and it just isn't working. That's happened multiple positions throughout the team. So where is your confidence that they'll be able to go out and fix it in the transfer portal and hit like Mel Tucker did, or whether it's the players already on the team that you feel like were cornerstones of the last couple of recruiting classes that we haven't seen yet? Why would you have any confidence that these guys are going to be different? So it's kind of a tough spot to be in. Steve, do you remember your point? Sorry.
Yeah, that was great. But I was just kind of wanting to ask you guys a question about the offensive line, and everything that I've always read, like from coaches, from what they talk about, to analysis about like playing the game of football. They always mention that the offensive line is the most difficult to get good at right away, especially in a conference like the Big Ten, when you're going up against these NFL caliber edge guys almost every single week. Now, if we look at the career of Bryce Benhart and Turner Corcoran, they were thrown in there fairly early in their careers. Now, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate, because the coaches say that, oh, we got some young pieces on offensive line. They're young. Is that just kind of like what do we think of that? Because they are young players and they are playing in a very difficult conference to be an offensive tackle in, correct? And how do you get better reps? So just what do you guys think about that? And just kind of Benhart and Kirk Corcoran kind of being thrown in there earlier in their careers against NFL caliber guys almost every week.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because this is, and like to play even more devil's advocate, this is part of the problem with where he took over the program. They didn't have any depth on the offensive line. And so they've had to build depth on the offensive line. And, you know, when you take over a new program and you have a guy like Brendan Hymas, it's a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because you look at him and you say, well, we got this really good guy. We can allocate resources elsewhere and we can focus elsewhere. And, you know, maybe that's the wrong thing to do when you're building a program. But like what they've had is like like Bryce Benhart has been around for a little bit, but Turner Corcoran specifically this season, just first time playing. You know, he had one game against Rutgers, but this is his first time playing. And everything that they have said to this point was that they want to get to a program where specifically at the offensive and defensive lines, they are getting guys in and they're taking the Nash Hutmacher route. They are going and getting into the program and they're not playing for, 2 or 3 years. They're just developing, putting on strength, learning the ins and outs of it for 2 or 3 years. And they haven't had that luxury, I guess, on the offensive line. So, and we're 4 years in, so it's not a Riley problem anymore. It's a them problem because, they could have gone out in the transfer portal and added people and they haven't. But yeah, I think that's a really good point is that they do, part of this is they've got young tackles and, you got to get those guys better by playing them. And those guys are going to get beat as they're trying to get better.
Yeah, but also that doesn't speak to the regression. And
no, not at all.
And the fact that these guys are all in their third. So Corcoran's in his second year in the program. Everybody else on that line that has played has been playing college. This is their third year or more of college football. So they're all listed as freshmen and sophomores, but they've got a little bit more experience than kind of that label would suggest. And they do have older guys up there that, and we've seen what happens when they don't try to go young with Matt Sichterman, who's been a good leader and he's done everything they needed of him and he's stuck with the program. And it's good for him that he's earned the chance to play, but that position has been a problem as well. Just even Juergens, like he's played well for stretches, but it's not like he's been a dominant all conference level center week in and week out. So they just haven't played well at any spot along the line. And that does go back to development, regardless of the experience level of the guy out there.
Yeah. But, and I'm just trying to say that this has been a thing. Ethan Piper played early. Cam Juergens played early because they didn't have anybody else. Ben Hart played. They moved. I mean, part of it was they wanted him to get on the field, but he played early and they moved Farniok inside. Corcoran has played early. Jacob's got to go in a few minutes. So I want to transition to this next kind of topic and get his thoughts first, because all roads here lead back to one specific conversation. There are 4 games left. Nebraska needs 3 of them if it's going to go to a bowl game. If it doesn't get 3 of those 4 games, the schedule includes Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Iowa. They will not go to a bowl game for the 5th consecutive year. It'll be 4 straight years under Scott Frost. And if they don't get to 6-6, that'll be 4 straight sub 500 wins for Scott Frost. His record currently sits at 15-25. That is a .375 winning percentage. So all of this stuff that we've talked about, they are close, and we see them being close in a lot of respects. Does a coaching change reset everything and put you back to square one? Or does a coaching change sort of bridge those metaphorical last 6 inches?
I ultimately think it goes back to what you believe about Scott Frost and what he's going to do. What is he willing to do? Does he understand why they're 6 inches short? Or is he thinking like, oh, we're so close, we just need a few breaks to go, I'm going to keep doing the same way? Or is he willing to kind of adjust and reassess how he's doing things and put in the work to get over that hump? Is he willing to make whatever changes are necessary? And not talking about staff changes here. I'm talking about him and the way he runs the program and the Monday through Friday and all that stuff that leads up to the problems that we see on Saturday. Is he willing and capable of changing that stuff here? We're in year 4 and it doesn't seem like there's much has changed there. So ultimately it's going to come down to what Trev Alberts believes about what Scott Frost is capable and willing to do. And that's something that we can't answer. We're not in those conversations. We're not in practice every week to see if changes are being made. But ultimately this falls on Alberts and what he believes about Frost and where this is going. Because if you don't feel like he is going to be able to fix those things, does it matter how close you are? Because you still can't win. So I think I'd rather start over, and even if it takes a step back, get in somebody that you have more confidence in the ability to kind of get where this program needs to be. I think that those are the questions that Trev Alberts has to answer for himself over the last 4 weeks of the season, 4 or 5 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and before we kind of get to the big question of whether or not a coaching change would be needed and can get them to that last 6 inches, there's something else I've been thinking about in like the last day, in that Nebraska is in full control over how that conversation is shaped at the end of the season. When we get past Black Friday and we're talking one way or the other about what needs to happen with Scott Frost, they have control over that. And what I mean by that is, if to me, the big question right now that I'm thinking about is, has Scott Frost built a team and a team culture that sees all of this talk surrounding their head coach and is going to go to bat for him? Like, are they going to rally around the fact that their backs are against the wall and that they need to perform better? Yes. The coaches also need to perform better. Yes. Scott Frost needs to lead better. Yes. That's all recognized. But like, if you think about it, and Derek kind of mentioned it earlier and made me think about it again, when you think about the wide receiver issues and how, you start off with one group and then you kind of push some of them out and you bring in another group. And to me, they've done that at so many different positions that I wonder like how much continuity there is there and how much like people really have his back. I think we're going to find that out come these last 4 games because his back's against the wall. Now, to answer the actual question, I think a new coach would help get them over or past that last 6 inches, because I just don't know if Scott Frost is the right guy for this particular team and what it needs. And by that, I mean, I think that this team needs, and I know people will go, oh my God, they need someone closer to what Bo Pelini was like than they do someone that's like Scott Frost. Scott Frost to me is too hands off for what this team needs. And we saw it again this past week when, we just need to get to the bye week and, kind of letting the team, because I think that we have more leadership and I think that our team is more veteran, they're going to be able to handle this. Obviously, they could not handle that, right? Like, I just think that the team needs more of someone who will give them more of a kick in the pants on a regular basis than what Scott Frost seems to be willing to do or can do, because maybe it's not his personality or whatever. But I just feel that would help them down the road.
Sean Eichhorst's head is exploding. Steve, where you at?
I think we're going to learn a lot from this team in these last 4 games too. Like Greg pointed out, will they fight for Scott? Will they come out just completely flat and just kind of just cruise through these last 4 games because they know that they're not going to make a bowl game if they don't go 3-1? But yeah, it's I'm kind of on the boat that it might be a time for a coaching change, but again, we're going to learn a lot from this team and how much they want to fight for the head coach in these last 4 games.
Yeah, I think the point that needs to be made here as we sit, October 21st, talking about a potential coaching change, there's still 4 games left. And a lot about the narrative can change over the next 4 weeks. A lot over the last
couple of weeks, right? Like,
it's been some major momentum shifts.
We've seen some major shifts just in the last few weeks.
Yeah, Nebraska is certainly bipolar in that respect, and that you're talking about them coming off the Northwestern game. A lot of people are picking them not just to cover against Michigan, but outright win against Michigan, and then the way that game ends, it's like, well, Nebraska's the best 4-loss team in the country. You get a lot of that from not just local Nebraska people, but like the Reddit college football pages tweeting that. So you're getting like national attention for, hey, this is an improved Nebraska team. Greg, I think I said this on your podcast whenever I was on it last. I think they've reached the point where Trev is going to have to evaluate this season based not on wins and losses, but how it looks and how it feels. And to your guys' point about how the team is going to respond and how the team is going to either have Frost back or not over the last 4 games, I think that's going to answer a lot of questions that Trev has and that Trev should be asking himself. So I think the evaluation period for him right now is basically like, is this a team that is moving in the right direction? And I can see progress and I can see growth and I can see guys that still believe in what's going on. If God forbid they lose to Purdue, what does the loss look like? What is the team's response? How do they start the game against Purdue? If it's a loss, what does the loss look like? If it's, Purdue has a last minute drive, like, I'm sorry to bring this up, App State beating your is it Chance or Chance, Steve?
Chance.
Okay, Chance. I want to get the correct nomenclature. If it's a loss like that, or it's a field goal in the last second, I just think it's different. And I think part of this with Trev is, and Brandon Vogel made this point, so I want to give him credit. He's going to have to decide whether Nebraska's inability to win these close games is because of Frost or because of some kind of quality with the Nebraska program overall. And it's been this way. This lingering kind of quality predates Frost. It's not necessarily something that he showed up and all of a sudden Nebraska started, pooping its pants late in games. Like, Nebraska's, I think, 4-28 against top 10 opponents since 2000. And the record against just ranked opponents in the AP poll is just as bad. They haven't been able to consistently get themselves over the hump under what was the guy's name before Bo Pelini, who I'm now Bill Callahan. I don't know why my brain just blanked on him. Bill Callahan, Bo Pelini, Mike Riley. Bo was fired because he couldn't get over the proverbial hump. And now you're at Scott Frost. So Trev's sort of thing is going to be, if I am making a coaching change, does it solve the problem? Or is Frost getting me closer to where we need to be? And part of Nebraska's problem over the last 2 decades is, Greg, the word that you use, continuity. They haven't had enough of it. I am a firm believer in continuity in sports, and sports organizations breed success. And I think, to an extent, Trev's tenure as the athletic director is going to be defined by the decision that he makes with Scott Frost, the way that he handles Scott Frost's situation. And if that is indeed the case, I wonder if, because we are having this conversation of, I don't know if Scott Frost is the guy to get us there, even at the end of this season, if it's still, I don't know. I mean, some of this is just being unlucky. Some of this is guys making mistakes. Some of it, if it's not clear, and I don't think it's clear because we have been able to have this conversation for the last hour, does he just wait one more year and say, it's on you? Like, you're going to answer the question one way or the other. If it's another year of this, then that answers the question. But even then, that's just kicking the can down the road one more year, because you could say that that's the case this year. Where are you guys at?
I think, and I was going to, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the whole staff retooling situation, and does Scott Frost, how does he get to the point? And this is where I sit right now is, I think that the best case scenario for how the season is trending is that Scott somehow comes out of this season with the ability to retool his staff. And that's the best case scenario to me. So when you think about that, are you then just kicking the can down the road? And if you need to do that in year 4, is that really, are there any examples of that actually turning an entire program around? And the question that I would also have, if I'm Trev, along with the one that Brandon posed, which is really good, is, as we're hoping to get better and over the hump, or even to the hump in this case, because the record has been so bad, why has it been so bad? Why can't it be 500 while we try to get there, right? Why does it have to be no bowls for 4 years if it goes the way? I mean, technically they can still, pull off this 3-win miracle, but why does it have to be that? And how come that gap has not been bridged over these last 4 years? And I think that would be an interesting answer as well to find out, is that why it has had to be this bad.
Again, just to play devil's advocate, I don't want people listening to this to start skewering me on social media. It was very bad when he took over. Very bad. It was very bad.
Can I push back on that?
No.
Well, I'm going to. Okay, we say that. And I want to be careful in how I phrase this. We say that it was very bad when he took over. And people, by people, I mean everyone in this case, turned a blind eye when Scott Frost ran all of those guys off that were Mike Riley guys. And as Scott Frost took those digs at Mike Riley in the previous regime, we all chucked it up to, hey, that Frost confidence and he's going to get them going, right? but they were much more successful than Scott Frost has been. Like, it's not really close. And so, like, to say that it was very bad under Mike Riley is, yeah, sure. But if that was very bad, what is this?
I'm not saying it was very bad under Mike Riley. I'm saying the situation in his first year was very bad. It was a bad situation. And so you can, I don't want to make excuses for 4-8, but you can understand 4-8 in that context. 2019 was a disappointment. If you want to call it a failure.
Given the expectations of the year 2 bump, given what we did. Yeah.
Well, they sort of did that to themselves to some degree, which is a con in Frost's column, to be completely fair, that he didn't immediately shut down like, hey, we went 13-0 in our year 2 there, we're going to do that here. He didn't shut that down. And so that's kind of a problem. But year 3 is COVID. So like, I don't like the year 0 acronym jargon garbage stuff. I don't like that. But you have to take each individual situation on its specific merits and factor in context. And year 1, 0, whatever you want to call it, 2018, the situation was bad. Like he didn't have a quarterback, didn't have an offensive line. And defensively, their starting point was like 127th nationally out of 130 teams. That was the defensive starting point for them. That's where they've had to climb from. And so when you have that and you don't have a quarterback and you're starting a true freshman that didn't play his senior year of high school football, like that's a tough starting point. And you're also starting from a point where dudes weren't squatting from where your strength and conditioning program was so like lacking. It's a tough situation. Now I agree with you that they Avery Roberts is a tackling machine for Oregon State, and some of the guys that have left the program have been successful elsewhere. You're right, 100%. But it was still, and because of that, like it was a bad situation. And so now we're in year 4, and you can sort of understand 3-5, whatever it was in 2020. Because it was COVID and everything was wild. And you can sort of understand 2018. This isn't, and again, I'm not like making excuses for a 15-25 record, because that shouldn't be acceptable at a place like Nebraska, but this is just weird. All of this is weird. All of it is weird and requires like couching and a lot of context.
Right. But why do we have to couch so much? Why does it have to be that
That's fair.
bad? Like,
fair.
I'm serious. Like, and I went back and I pulled up the schedule, and I remember that Troy game that they lost 24-19 in Lincoln to Troy. That was, I believe,
Andrew Bunch was the starting quarterback.
Right?
Andrew Bunch was your starting quarterback.
I will give you that. But should you be losing to Troy at home?
Andrew Bunch was your starting quarterback.
Should you be blown out by Purdue at home in that year? And so my bigger point here is why can't there be more bridging of the gap to get by? It seems like it's so all or nothing. But
here's what I would say to that. They have bridged the gap. They lost by 3 points to Michigan. A punt kept them from winning the game. And other stuff happened, I know. A punt cost them another top 10 victory on the road against Michigan State. They were in the game with a chance to win at the end on the road against a top 10 Oklahoma team that might make the playoffs. Like, it's not like whatever it was against Ohio State in 2019, where they come to town and you're on ABC and the game is over 3 minutes after the start. ABC was in town. It was a night game for Michigan, and they were in the game at the end. You have bridged the gap. You just haven't won games. And it's been so frustrating the way they haven't won games, but they have bridged the gap, right? Because you're not getting blown out in those games.
Okay, so they're not. They've made improvements. Instead of losing by a lot, they're losing by a little, but they're still losing.
Right.
I don't know, man. I struggle with that, and I feel like, again, this also comes back to a little bit of that psyche of the team thing. As I often wonder if part of why what happened at Minnesota, because the team heard that they were so close to beating these really good teams, and they really believed that and pumped themselves up with that, thinking, oh, we're just playing Minnesota. And then they went out there and laid an egg against Minnesota. I kind of wonder if that was a factor in that case too. It's just tough. Like I do agree though, as we argue about this, with your larger point that there's a lot of weird here. Yeah. And that's what makes this such a fascinating thing and such a tough decision for Trev Alberts as we sit here on October 21st. Now, I think that some of this will be answered by the time we get to the end of the season, one way or the other, because if it continues to go really badly and let's say they lose out, then I think we kind of know. But if they make things interesting and they win a couple of these, then it also makes that an even tougher decision.
Yeah, if they lose out and they lose, because that would be 6 straight losses to the end of the season. They have answered the question.
You couldn't have another 3 and not like you could.
They have answered the question. And it's funny, Trev doesn't listen to this podcast. I know he doesn't listen to this podcast, but let's just say Trev Alberts is listening to this podcast. Like everything that's being said, he's just nodding along and being like, yeah, now you guys see why my job sucks right now.
Oh yeah.
Steve, where are you at on all of this?
I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think about, so do you agree that Nebraska plays up to competition and then plays down to competition?
100%. Yes.
Yes, 100%.
So is that like coaching? Do you view that as the players and what they view at like how they view their opponents? Like, oh, we're going to Minnesota. They lost to Bowling Green. We'll beat them. Is that like still happening in year 4 of this program?
Yeah. And I think that's a problem with coaching.
Exactly.
I agree with that. Even though it flies in the face of the one sloganeering that we get like thrown down our throats all the time about nameless, faceless opponent.
Yeah, they have them too.
That shouldn't be the case. Like if they talk so much about that, but yet that it clearly is the case that Nebraska plays differently based on the opponent, unless they're playing Ohio State. Then in which case it's just rough either way. Like everyone else, like there's an ebb and flow depending on who they're playing.
But I don't like the nameless, faceless opponent thing. And I've never liked it.
I've actually, to shout out Brandon Vogel again, we had a long conversation about this one day, about how the program has not been in the position to really actually embrace that type of mentality. They actually need to be told, I think, on a weekly basis that you need to get fired up for this opponent. It would be preferable to me if they had been really pissed off in the last week leading up to Minnesota, because clearly Minnesota has beef with Nebraska. Clearly PJ Fleck and Scott Frost don't get along. Like I would have been better going into that week if they had just kind of come out and alluded to that versus the whole nameless faceless opponent thing. I don't think it serves the program. Plus, just big picture, there's a reason why every sports team or most of them use different slogans.
Yeah,
like it works.
Yeah.
We're talking about 18-year-olds.
And I think it works both ways as well. I think it works both ways to get yourself ready for big games, to get yourself ready for rivalry games, but also to get your team into a mental headspace where I think there's an element to like, let's say you're playing Illinois and you acknowledge the fact everyone thinks these guys are beneath you. Do not go out and play to their level. You are better than this team. Go prove that you are better than this team, as opposed to saying, nameless, faceless opponent, everybody's tough. We got it. I think there's an element to you need to go out and motivate you guys. And that's a great point, Steve. I'm glad you brought it up. I think it has been one of the problems because they do play up to competition and they do play, unfortunately, down to competition a lot.
I just think that goes along with the disconnect on offense and why I think that a change needs to not, I don't like, honestly, I think probably Trev probably brings him back next year. But me personally, I think that's why there probably needs to be a change, is because on the offensive side of the ball, I think there's just a disconnect. Not everybody's just, again, we've talked about the weird stuff happening. They've been so close, but there's always, I always ask myself, what's Nebraska's offensive identity? They don't have one, but their identity is making a back-breaking mistake and playing down to their opponents and playing up to their opponents and still coming out on the losing end. I think there's a disconnect that's just, it's been 4 years of that already. And I think that there needs to be a change, honestly.
Man, and I wish, the thing is, though, and now I'm going to play devil's advocate to Derek, or to be like Derek here, and that I think that a little bit of an identity was starting to be shown on offense with the option stuff. Now,
but they're not going full bore with that.
Yes, they're not going full bore with that, but could you make the argument that they're not going full bore with that because Adrian's actually injured? I don't know. But
No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't say we can't run the option because our quarterback is banged up. Well, then you shouldn't have been running the option in the first place.
Or you should have had him out there, and you knew that for most of the week. It's not like that snuck, like that injury didn't happen within the game. And so but again, so many of these things though then end up coming back to coaching, because it still rubs me the wrong way that we went back to, was it week 1 or week 2 when they started doing some of that option stuff? I think it was week 2. And then, well, technically week 1. And then Scott Frost said, oh no, this isn't going to be this won't be around. It won't be a main part of our offense. And then it continued to steadily grow within the offense. But I do think that they kind of have found something with that. But then to Steve's point, they then didn't make that the main feature of the run game. And I wonder, I just wonder why that is, that couldn't have been the main feature of the run game when it worked. And there were so many things built off of that, as you saw in the Michigan game, that, as to Derek's point, their stuff works in a lot of cases. And that was one of them, but it just doesn't seem to be fully leaned into. And maybe it's because that's not the offense, but I don't know.
That's the answer to me. I think it's because this wasn't an expected development for them. It was something where this works and we have to find ways to get around our offensive line to create space and to create opportunities for Adrian, either in the run game or the pass game. I think part of it is, when Frost says in week 1, week 2, whenever it was, where he's like, this isn't a huge part of our offense. It's just something that's kind of there. It has grown because I think instead of it being something that they planned on growing throughout the season, I think it's an adjustment that they have made to where, again, it goes back to the offensive line. We're going to try to push the offensive line, block them down, and we're going to leave that one guy, and we're just going to let Adrian be in space and use his God-given athleticism to make plays. And you see them start to build play action off of it as it has worked, which is like what he's getting the ball out relatively quickly. I think it's one of those things where it's something that they have used as an answer to, we don't have a competent offensive line.
But it's encouraging that they did that in the first place. Then I would say that, because there are other times where you think that stubbornness would to keep hold and not allow for that. I just wish they would lean into it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to help out a poor offensive line for an offense, is to do a lot of the spread option things that they have been doing. But again, when you have a quarterback who obviously isn't 100% and doesn't want to be running the ball, and you want to protect him, and the backup quarterback situation is what it is with Logan Smothers, I mean, you get performances like we got at Minnesota, right?
Yep. Yeah. And this is like this whole conversation since we pivoted to the Scott Frost, is he or is he not, it has just been a whole big like shoulder shrug where you're just like, yeah, we got, I feel this, but also I could see this. Well, but there's but also I could see, it's just, that's kind of where you're at. And which, that's why I just keep coming back to, if they had a above average offensive line, I don't think we're having this conversation. And to a large degree, if Jacques Yant doesn't stumble, I think the conversation is different. If Adrian doesn't fumble, I think the conversation is different. If, the punt goes right instead of left, I think the conversation is different. And some of those things are just like, what do you do with that? And so, Greg, I think you've made the best point of the whole podcast, that like the last 4 games are going to either change the narrative again, probably 3 or 4 more times, or they're going to give you your answer. So we will see. We accomplished a whole lot of nothing on this podcast. Congrats, guys! But that's the way this first 8 games have gone. So
I think it actually was very emblematic of what this experience has been like.
Cool. All right. Well, you guys got to go. Jacob dropped off already. Thank you both for coming on this podcast. I appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you for having me. Read
both Greg and Steve and Jacob as well. He dropped off. I forgot to say him. Read all of them at hailvarsity.com. Again, subscribe. hailvarsity.com/subscribe. Make sure that you are listening to everybody's podcasts. There's no Nebraska football game this weekend, but there is college football, and there will still be Hail Varsity content on the website this weekend. So make sure that you are reading that. And we'll be back next week. Thanks, guys.
A Hurrdat Media Production.